Hi guys, it's me again, your little old pal, Die on the fly, and yes, the back of my neck is itching, sorry. Anyway, I got the next story for you here, so just give me a second and I'll pull it up and we'll start getting busy. So give me 1 second, please. Alrighty. Here's our third story, and someone actually wrote me, and this one is called The Demon. And it's submitted by Almost Possessed 044. Sorry, there's 3 4s. And here's what she had to say. First of all, I wanted to start off letting you all know that I am a girl, in case you were wondering. Anyway, at the age of 14, I was sent by the state to live with my father after my mother decided she didn't want to be bothered being a mother to a rebellious teenager. I flew from LAX to Tampa Airport. Quite the interesting 8-hour ride. My parents, father and stepmother, picked me up at my let-off gate and took me down the road for us to have breakfast out as a family. Then we headed off to where they were living. For a little while, a few months maybe, things were peaceful in my parents' homey little trailer. But one night, things began to turn dark. See, I knew my friend and I, Billy Joe by the way, from Cali, aka California, should not have went into this abandoned house she too happily pointed out to me. We stood outside for some time that one summer day, her teasing me that I was chicken to go into a haunted house. Yeah, I was scared, but I wasn't about to let on. And you know teenagers, they always end up going places they have no business being in. Anyhow, I grew tired of Billy Joe's needling, so we finally crept inside of this house. First room we walked into was the kitchen. It was very dirty, and it had very obvious signs that a homeless person was living there. That alone made me scared. But wanting to appear tough and unafraid, I followed Billy Joe into the rest of the house. And excuse me guys, I'm gonna cough, my throat's tickling, sorry. Continuing. The atmosphere in the living room of this abandoned house was scarier than coming into the house itself. The heaviness almost felt like an entity within itself, and my heart began to pound in fear. I followed Billy Joe from room to room, silently going, "Whoa," to myself over all the stuff that had been left there. When we got back to the living room, Billy Joe got a huge grin on her face and all too happily pointed out part of a rope hanging from one of the beams in the ceiling. I had an idea of what she was going to say, but fear gripped me and my vocal cords wouldn't work. "I heard about this house, you know," said Billy Joe happily. "Some lady hung herself here in this living room, and they say the house is haunted now because of her." There was indeed half of a thick rope hanging from one of the ceiling beams, and my scared mind began to envision a group of policemen cutting down the dead old lady, her face purple and bloated, the body smelling like a week-old dead thing that had been laying in the sun. It was not a nice vision. Even for as scared as I was, I waited for Billy Joe to continue on. I felt convinced there was more to the story than what she was letting on, but she did not speak any further. I felt just a hair of anger creep into my body, along with more fear. I did not want to hear what Billy Joe had just told me about the old lady, and I did not want to think about the visions that were running through my mind. So looking for a distraction, I found something that pleased my eye. Spread across this mattress on the living floor was a plethora of books. Being an avid reader, whose only other friends were books, my mind sang with pleasure. After 20 minutes of picking through the books, I found a cowboy book that was one of a series that had been read to me in grade school. I tucked it under my arm with pleasure, even though I could still also feel my own fear singing amongst the atmosphere of the house. I found the courage to speak. "Let's get out of here," I said. "The place is too creepy." No sooner after I said that, something thumped in the house. Fear motivated both of us to run out of the house screaming. We did not stop running until we were half a block or more away from the house. Panting and out of breath, I finally decided to stop running and turned around to look at the house. Something compelling that I had felt made me want to look back at the house. Everything I had felt and envisioned there stood out fresh in my mind. You know how it is when something freaks you out, but you still have to go back for that second and third look. I looked at the house, and then I glared over at Billy Joe. "Don't you ever take me to another scary house like that again. We could have been raped by the homeless guy who liked the peanut butter," I snapped. "As a matter of fact," I snarled, "I'm not going anywhere scary with you ever again." Amusement flashed across Billy Joe's eyes, which made me even madder. Her usually fun and funny laugh made me really mad as it issued from her throat. "Aw, what's the matter, big baby?" she guffawed, barely able to contain herself. "Did the big bad house scare you?" I turned heel on her and snarled, "I'm serious. If you ever do that again, you and I will not be friends any more. Ever again." I then began to walk away, feeling the need to do something to settle down my rage. It was a bold move on my part. I'm almost sure Billy must have been rooted to the ground for a few seconds behind me at the house, total shock flowing across her face. See, only really confident people walked away from Billy Joe, and I wasn't that confident. I was desperate for a friend. I must have walked fast for 2 or 3 minutes when I finally heard Billy Joe's footsteps catching up to me. She wheezed as bad as I do when I run. We weren't huge girls, but we weren't tiny and small-boned either. The angry part of me got a slight rush of pleasure watching Billy Joe's cheeks reddening and hearing her panting. "Okay," she gasped. "I'm sorry. I won't ever take you somewhere scary again." There was an audible, amusing, breathy squeak to Billy Joe speaking. The anger still half simmering in me drew pleasure from the thought. All of me felt really ashamed at my own thoughts and anger when she reached out to hug me. Part of me wanted to stay mad, but it was Billy Joe. She was the only friend I had in Cali at the time. My own insecurity and desperation made me relent on staying mad at her. We walked around until 2:35 that afternoon, then hurriedly rushed back to the school where we were supposed to have been all day in the first place. We made it look good, or so we thought at the time. We walked up to our lockers, grabbed some folders and some books, and then rushed off to the 3 o'clock bell with the other kids. Anyhow, little did I know that that book would be my spiritual undoing, which brings me back to the beginning of this story. It was peaceful for about 3 months or so in my parents' trailer, and I had bought that cowboy book with me. Nothing had ever happened before surrounding this book, so I stayed busy reading it when not in school or doing chores and homework. Then one night, the dark, the scary, and the hell began. I don't remember what day of the week it was when I was first scared awake, but that first time being awakened like that blew my mind. The atmosphere of the room was filled with pure hatred and pure evil. The feeling flew around the room so thick, it felt like a being of its own. Even scarier, it felt like someone was in the room with me, and it was hateful, and I could feel that it meant to get me. I was too scared to roll over to my night table and turn on my little lamp. In fact, something in me warned me not to. Panicked, I looked all over the room, trying to see if there was anything or anyone I could see. I could feel it, but it was not showing itself. Suddenly, I felt something fly viciously right to my face. A vicious but invisible pair of hands gripped my neck, and I felt hot, hateful breath in my ear. "I'll kill you," it growled, even scarier than the demon in the most famous ghost movie everyone knows. It shook me, and I felt like my bed and body were really shaking, and the fingers tightened around my neck. I was scared to death, and the only thing my terrified mind could think to do was to pray the Lord's Prayer. This made the thing angry, and it gripped me even tighter to a body I could not see. "Stop it," it growled in the most horrific voice. It continued to shake me and strangle me for what seemed like an endless eternity. Then finally, I felt it in its anger leave go of me and fade away. I was too scared to sleep the rest of the night without my little lamp on. At first I wasn't sure how long these attacks continued. 2 years total, I think, but I was desperate for them to stop. I tried to tell my parents about these attacks, but they didn't believe me, and they made it clear that they really didn't want to hear it. I was hurt and appalled. I thought if no one else would believe in me, at least my parents would, no matter what. I was too young for it to cross my mind that maybe what I was telling them was too scary to even imagine. And the attacks, they continued, night after night after night. Finally, in desperation, I grabbed the ornate collection edition family Bible and began sleeping with it spread across my chest every single night that I could get away with it without my parents noticing. Those were the only times I had peace, but the peace did not last for long. On one of the many nights I fell asleep with that Bible spread across my chest for protection. I must have knocked it off in the middle of my sleep. That was one of many nights that horrid thing made its presence known. On this night that I'm speaking of, the attack lasted longer, and it was much more vicious. Not only did the hateful thing spew evil threats in my ear, this particular night it strangled me even harder. And when it finally let me go and faded away, I turned on my light and ran to the mirror. Sure enough, I saw exactly what I thought I was going to see in that mirror. Purplish finger and thumb marks were spread across the whole of my throat. I panicked at the sight, and I panicked how I was going to get my parents to actually believe me that all of this was real. I made one last desperate attempt to talk to my parents and get them to listen to me, but it didn't work. My parents acknowledged that there were indeed marks on my neck, but they accused me of putting them there. They accused me of being selfish, attention-seeking, and suicidal. and they again warned me to stop talking about this thing and stop blaming my sickness on something that wasn't real. It really killed me inside that they had accused me of putting those marks on my own neck. Even if I had strangled myself, which I didn't, there would have been no possible way for me to turn my hands and fingers at the angles of the prints that clearly stood out on my neck. I felt hurt, betrayed, and desperate that my parents didn't believe me despite what they saw. But I also knew that I had lied and had gotten into too much trouble, so why should they have believed what I was saying? Still, the hurt ached in my heart and my spirit. I was desperate for help and answers, so one day while my parents were at work, I made a sneaky long-distance call to my friend Billy Joe. Instead of teasing me, she listened to my entire story and then came up with a realistic plan to handle the situation. She instructed me to draw crosses on every page, including the front and back covers, and then to fully burn the book. I gladly complied, but it didn't help anything. I think burning that haunted book is the same as when you burn a Ouija board. It unleashes the really bad stuff, and the really bad stuff began happening during these attacks too. Anyhow, the nightly attacks continued on for 2 years. I'm totally sure now. I was nervous all the time, and my parents interpreted it as I must be covering something bad I did up. I knew I wasn't, but I knew that they still wouldn't believe me, so in desperation on one night's attack, I took my own bed pillow and proceeded to smother myself until I passed out. I had wanted to die. It was crazy, but the next thing I knew, I could see my room clear as day. And I remember feeling surprised that I saw a girl's body on the bed. Then, just as quickly, I was whisked away to another place. In front of me was a long dark tunnel, and for some reason I felt compelled to follow it. Wherever I was heading, it was almost like I knew where I was going, and as I got closer and closer to the end of the tunnel, my hurt and anguished feelings faded away, and I was overwhelmed with a sense of the hugest love and joy that I had ever felt in my life. I don't know how long it took, but I finally reached near the end of the tunnel. It was lit with a very bright light that somehow I knew wasn't from the sun. I could feel the love and presences of my Nana and Papa. I cried out to them in joy. But even though I could feel that they were happy to see me in return, I could also feel that they felt like they had to back away from the other powerful, loving presence I felt and saw. I was sure it was God, and He made it clear that He was God. "I love you," said the powerful presence I believed to be God, "but it is not your time, my child. You have to go back. I have something to show you." I tried to protest, but the power from this being silenced my thoughts before I could even convey them. Then, just as suddenly as I had stood before this powerful presence who was God, and also the presence of my grandparents, I was speedily conveyed back to my body somehow. When I awoke, I remember being really sad and really disappointed that I had been sent back to earth, yet at the same time I felt a joy. Somehow I knew God had kept away the damage despite what I had done to myself that night, and I felt a large sort of joy that I had actually gotten to see and speak to God and my grandparents. After that I felt compelled to keep going on this earth, even though a part of me was sort of angry that I still had to be here. I think I must have had about a month's peace before things began starting all over again. And as soon as the attack started up again, I again became desperate, depressed, and began getting in trouble. In fact, I even ran away. My parents were hurt and angry, They thought I was being bad to drive them crazy, but my rebelling and my running away was done in desperation for a permanent escape from what I was going through. My dad finally got the fits with me, and he withdrew the contents of my savings account and rushed me to Pennsylvania to my birth mother. I was not happy about having my hard-earned working money taken away, and I was especially not happy at being forced to go back to my birth mother. It sounds crazy, but I would have rathered that my dad had put me in juvenile prison. Even that would have been better than being attacked night after night, and even that would have been better than to be put in a mental prison by a woman whom I felt neither loved me nor wanted me to have anything happy happen in my life. And just as surely as I said, my life was not happy with my mother. I began running away from the house too and skipping school. The kids at school did not like me, and they made it clear they didn't want to be friends with the poor kid. It was like reliving the nightmare I had previously lived with school and my mother when I was younger. Also, the same over-smothering and alternative neglect and hatefulness appeared again as though we had never been apart. So I finally reached my breaking point, and my mother and I ended up having this huge fight about school and alcohol and my rebelliousness. The fight was so raucous that she ended up calling the police on me. I told her go ahead because my spirit was broken and I just felt like nothing good was ever going to be or to happen in my life. I would never ever be able to escape my mother's clutches until I was 18. Somehow I just knew it. That is, until a certain officer arrived and took me outside to talk to him. Instead of threatening me with incarceration and condemning me for my rebelliousness, he actually cared enough to ask what had caused the fight and what all had been going on in my life the last couple of years. Instead of being snotty and rebellious, a dam of sorrow and relief flooded out of me. So I told the officer everything that had happened to me. He instructed me to stay in his car, behave, and not to touch anything, and he would not handcuff me and take me to jail. The officer then brought my mother outside her door to talk to him, and I could hear my mother screaming in anger that I wasn't going to be arrested, charged, and jailed for my end of the fight and my rebellious teenage behavior. The officer then got back into the car with me, and he said, "I can see why you've been acting up. It isn't right, but I can understand. I don't think you need jail like your mother screamed. I think you need help. So I'm going to call this in as negative, meaning for criminal activity and assault. And we're going to take you to the hospital." So instead of taking me to jail, the kind officer stopped at a convenience store and asked me if I wanted anything, and he then bought himself and me packs of cigarettes and 2 cold drinks. We continued to the hospital, and we continued our amiable, understanding-building conversation. I liked this officer, and he was kindly. He introduced himself to me as Jerry, and he insisted that I called him Jerry. I liked the fact that he thought me grown up enough to even be smoking and calling him by first name instead of officer. Anyway, back to the story, and long to short, I did finally escape the demon and those horrid attacks. I'm sure no one will ever believe me, but I don't care. Felt good to get it out. In any case, I will never ever forget what happened to me, and I will never ever forget the demon. And one more thing, if I can. If you're a parent, believe what your children are telling you when something is scary and something scary is happening. You may not believe in what you're hearing, but to them it's very real. So please, give your kids the benefit of the doubt. They probably are hearing what they are hearing to them, and they probably are seeing what they are seeing, again, to them. And don't discount what they're saying. The other side and the paranormal is more real than you can ever imagine.